welcome to episode 77, Did You Bring the Hummus podcast. I'm Kimberly, your host, and I'm super excited to be here with you today. Did You Bring the Hummus is a podcast for all things vegan. Most importantly, we'll talk about how to embrace this meaningful decision with fervor and fun. Episodes post every Monday on your favorite podcast app. Before we get started, I have one very important question for you. Did you bring the hummus? Do you love the podcast? Would you enjoy a shout out from me on a future episode? How about time to connect virtually with me and other listeners, either quarterly or monthly? If you're a vegan business who would like to sponsor episodes of Did You Bring the Hummus, I'd love to chat. Find my contact details in the show notes. Today, I am joined by Katrina Fox of Vegan Business Media. Katrina is a storytelling consultant, personal brand coach, and award-winning author of Vegan Ventures, Start and Grow an Ethical Business, the first global book providing success strategies for aspiring and existing vegan business owners. During her journalism career, she's written extensively for niche and mainstream media, and for more than 25 years on animal advocacy and ethical business, and was a regular Forbes contributor specializing in writing about vegan and plant-based businesses. A vegan of 28 years, Katrina helps ethical business leaders, entrepreneurs, and changemakers to find, craft, and share stories to inspire, influence, and impact their audiences. She loves glitter, sequins, and disco. The love for storytelling runs through this episode as we both nerd out about it. It's so good. Hey, Katrina, thanks for joining me. Welcome.
Hello, Kimberly. I'm so happy to be here and excited for our chat.
Me too. Let's just dive right in. Tell me about your vegan journey.
Okay, so when I was 11, I asked my mum what the beef burgers were made of that she was serving us for dinner. And she said, oh, they're from cows. And it took me a minute and I realized, oh my God, the cows died. This was once a beautiful living being. And I was horrified. Then I put two and two together and realized that the roast chicken, the chicken dinner we had, was the once alive chicken, and the fish fingers were fishes. And I was like, oh my gosh. So I said, I'm not eating animals anymore. Now, this was a long time ago. I grew up in England in a place called Dartford, which is just outside of southeast London. I was born in the East End of London, grew up in Dartford in a council flat, working class family. And this would have been 1977. So, not a time when veganism was like super popular like it is now. So it didn't go down terribly well at home, but it is what it is. Now, I came to veganism later, and that would have been about 1996. Now, I'd been doing some animal rights activism around about 1987 when I was at college, outside McDonald's, outside fast food restaurants and vivisection labs, doing that kind of thing. But somehow, and I don't know how, I missed the vegan memo despite being around animal activists. But then in 1996, I believe it was, I saw an ad in the Big Issue, which is a publication sold by homeless people to help them make money. There was a national protest against a kitten farm that bred kittens for vivisection in the UK, in Oxford. And they were going to have coaches or buses, I think you call them in America, like they were being hired, like activists were hiring them from all across the UK. And we were all going to be like converging on this little town near Oxford. And I thought, I'm going on that. Anyway, so I started to do that. And I think about a couple of times in, because they held these quite regularly, I was sat next to a lovely woman called Kay, who was a school teacher at the time. And I pulled out my Marmite and cheese sandwich. And I said, oh, would you like one? And she said, oh, no, I'm vegan. Now, I hadn't heard the word vegan before, but I said, oh, the cheese is vegetarian. There's actually no animal rennet in it. And then she said, oh, I understand that. She said, that's good. Well done. She said, but, and then she started to tell me about the dairy industry, about the cows being kept perpetually pregnant, babies stolen from them. And I was like, oh my gosh, I had never thought of that. Yet I'd come to feminism in the early 90s, and obviously, that part of feminism is about women's reproductive rights. And I thought, how did this not come up, in all the feminist meetings that I went to, or, in my readings. So I was a bit horrified. Anyway, I sent away for my vegan animal-free shopper, it was called, from the UK Vegan Society. And I read it, and it was just like this massive wake-up call. And, before then I'd been wearing like leather Doc Martens, and I thought, oh, well, leather's a byproduct, like, my belts were leather. I was like, oh, I'm good. I'm, you know what I mean? I kind of thought, oh,
Hmm.
I'm a good activist. And when I found out, the many ways that animals are exploited in so many household products, so many different ways, I was horrified. So I was one of those people that just went, right, that's it, I'm going vegan. So when I say it was pretty much overnight, it was overnight in terms of dietary. I came home from that protest, said to my wife, Tracy, right, that's it. I'm now vegan. I'm not eating cheese. I'm not eating eggs. Like all these things. She was just like, oh my gosh, because we both loved our cheese. And so, but obviously we had things like, I think we had some leather furniture, obviously had some leather shoes that, took a little bit of time, but as quickly as possible, we went fully vegan very quickly and have remained that way. So it's 28 years at the time of this recording. And back then it was not as easy. Like I remember going and searching for vegan cheese. So we were going to like the London Vegan Expo, which at the time was in a small hall called Conway Hall, and it had a few hundred people attend it. The Veg Fest UK, at its heyday had about 16,000. So, you can see how much it had grown. But back then, there were some companies that sold vegan cheese, and honestly, most of it tasted like rubber until finally we found one that we were like, okay, this is not half bad. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey, but honestly, I can say it's one of the best things I've ever done. And I think like most vegans, a lot of us would say we only wish we'd done it even sooner.
Yep, absolutely. You know, I appreciate that you shared the full story and how there are these moments where we think we're doing the best we can or the best for the movement that we're part of, and then we learn something and we're like, how have I missed that? Because I went vegetarian in 2001 and I did it overnight because I got an issue of PETA's Animal Times in the mail. And the story that made me go vegetarian overnight was about a downed cow. So I had already made a connection. Cows, I would say cows were my favorite animals. I loved them so much. And I had read the issue cover to cover, but that was the story that made me go, I'm not eating animal flesh anymore. But despite that, I didn't make the connection to the dairy industry. And I continued to eat way too much cheese for a long time. And I too had participated in a bunch of different like protests and stuff. And when I went vegetarian, I was 19, 20, living at home with my parents. So I had a job. So I kind of had disposable income. So I got rid of all my leather shoes, sneakers, handbags. The only thing keeping me from being vegan was the fact that I was still eating eggs and cheese. And I would go to these protests and I'm protesting fur and I'm protesting, I don't like whatever, the circus, but still like, yeah, heading off and like packing a cheese sandwich with me. But we need like, I think we need to have certain experiences or we need to hear something a certain way before it clicks. Because despite all that exposure I had, it never occurred to me, well, if you care about animals from an ethical perspective, that's why you're doing this. Why are you still engaging in abusing and using animals, even exploiting them by paying someone to do this for you?
Well, I
Yeah.
think what it is, particularly with the dairy, I think we've literally all been influenced by the propaganda from the dairy
Mm,
industry. I grew up as a child with adverts for something called Dairy Lee, which were like these little cream cheese triangles. And, my mum would put them in a sandwich, you'd spread them on, and I loved them. And obviously, the advertising that the dairy industry done, it's all about, oh, the cows are happy, they're giving
mhm.
us their milk. And it's just, I mean, I can still remember jingles from some of these ads from when I was a small child. Like they're so kind of ingrained in us that it
Yeah.
doesn't open you up to questioning. There is this major, it's called cognitive dissonance, where you just cannot see it, even though it's right in front of you. But it was only when this woman Kate, and bless her heart, and I always credit her because she was so kind in the way. Remember, I was on a bus, a
Mhm.
coach full of animal rights activists, some of whom are quite full on, intense. And she was next to me. She could have said, what? This woman's got a cheat. You know what I mean? Like she could have
Mhm.
gone any number of ways, but she was just so kind. She just ever so calmly and politely told me, and I was like, what? really. And and I always try and remember that, because I think when you've been vegan a long time, for me it's 28 years, sometimes you can forget that you were once participating in this exploitation and not realizing, and all the rest of it. And look, I don't think any of us can be perfect. The whole tenet of veganism is, as far as is practically possible, we all do the best we can. But I do remember her being kind and not judging me, not shaming me, and I thank her to this day that it was such a great way. And she's created a vegan convert who's been vegan for nearly 3 decades. So yeah, I think that's important as well. But I think it is important to recognize, and that's why I think as well, Kimberly, we need to change the narrative. We need to share these stories. I love that you said it was the story of a downed cow that made you change. And I think as well, especially if it's a story of a particular animal, because there's been psychological studies done that we can hear things like, oh, billions of animals are slaughtered, trillions of animals are slaughtered. And we think, oh yeah, that's not nice, and those are big numbers. But it doesn't touch us as much as when the cow is named, the animal is named and their individual story is told. Or same if it's a person. When you hear the story of an individual, people are much more likely to react, whether that's to donate to a charity or to take an action like you did and go vegan or go vegetarian. So yeah, interesting.
Yeah. So that leads me to something that you and I are both very passionate about, is storytelling. Like you were just saying, that's my favorite part of being a podcast host. And when I first started the podcast, I didn't really know where it was going to go. And initially it was just me sharing little bits. But as I've grown and interviewed people, the power in sharing our vegan journey, because we do present it as a story. No one just says, I wasn't vegetarian, or I ate animals and then I stopped eating animals and now here I am. We all have these different connections and traditions and stories and experiences that all like build together to create this and help us go vegan. And so we share these stories. And even when I do episodes on my own, like I have one where I shared a dream that I had, and it had me thinking of that quote. I always thought that someone should do something about that, and then I realized I'm someone.
Love
And
that. Yeah.
yeah, it's so great. And so to share this dream, and at first I woke up and I was like, "Oh, this was really disturbing and upsetting." And I thought I should do a podcast about this because it'll get people thinking. And I shared another episode about a king pigeon from New York City who had been dyed pink, and they named him Flamingo.
Mm.
And he did pass away from his injuries from having been dyed pink. But to share Flamingo's story, and it's just a quick, like, 12-minute episode, I think it is, to hear his story moves people. And
Exactly.
that's
Whereas if you
yeah.
talked about pigeons in general and, oh, we should be kind to pigeons, they're just trying to, people go, oh, yeah, whatever. And they've even seen them as flying rats or something, people say, but like when
Yeah.
you say, yeah, you personalize the animal and you tell their individual story, it has such an impact.
Yeah. So tell me how storytelling has kind of been this thread that you've used throughout your career.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of looking back because my profession, I mean, as a young child, I was quite creative. But like, at school, I loved English. So I loved making up stories. And I'm kind of glad I went to school when I did, because when I think back, some of the stories I wrote, if I'd have written them now, if I was a kid now, they'd have had the social workers, like, the people would be like, oh my God, what's going on in her mind? What's going on, kind of thing. But I literally just had a bit of an active imagination. And so in English language, rather, like, we would get to write our own creative stories. And I just loved doing that. My degree is actually in performing arts. So I started out, I thought I was going to study French and German. I did a year and I hated it. So I switched. I took a gap year and I was doing dance. So I was doing lots of dance classes at London School of Contemporary Dance. And then I enrolled in a performing arts degree, and I majored in dance for the first year and then in drama for the other 2 years. So I was kind of immersed in story, and I absolutely loved it, taking on other characters, writing. Like, it was such a great education, I think, because we did everything. So I guess that's always sort of been there with with me. And then I tried to kind of go the mainstream acting route for a little while, did some extra work, background extra work. Lived a little bit on the wild side for a few years. And then I studied journalism. I kind of was drawn to journalism. And I guess when I look back, I don't work as full-time as a journalist anymore, not since really 2015. But between those years, that was pretty much, a 20-year career in journalism, different facets of it. I was telling stories. My very first job in journalism was with an HR magazine, a personnel magazine in the UK. And I wrote one of the first articles and the readers were like HR directors and, personnel directors. And I wrote probably the first piece, I think it was, about helping trans people in the workplace. And of course, I quoted people and got their stories. And that actually made a difference. And so I saw how the power of story then could make a difference. And I've tried to do that throughout my journalism career. And I've just loved, like you, I love hearing people's stories and animal stories, of course. I love that stories move us, that they connect us, they can inspire people, they can influence people, and they can impact people. So when I moved away from journalism, I basically wrote a book called Vegan Ventures, Start and Grow an Ethical Business. And I interviewed people. I interviewed more than 60 vegan entrepreneurs from across the globe. And again, so it's that story. I wanted their stories. What were their challenges? How did they overcome them? What happened? What advice do they have? I loved that. Then the book came out and I thought, I miss doing these interviews. I know, I'll start a podcast. And that was Vegan Business Talk. So it was the first vegan business podcast in 2016. And, I've interviewed, I think, almost a couple of hundred vegan entrepreneurs. And so I just love that telling of stories, because like you can read a book, a how-to book, and Vegan Ventures is that. There's lots of how-to advice. But I think what makes books like that, like, how-to kind of books, is interesting or keeps people engaged and makes them stand apart a bit, is when a story is woven in. So you've got a quote from someone or someone sharing a specific something that happened to them. It just helps to keep you connected. Otherwise, everything's the same. And I think now we're in the age of AI, where a lot of people are going to be putting in similar prompts and they're going to be getting similar output. Your stories, particularly your personal stories, your business's stories, your customers' stories, all of those things, they are, and particularly your own, your founder story, your origin story, is personal to you. And your origin story is never one story. It's a collection of stories that's taken place. They are things that have happened. They are seen through your eyes, your truth, how you remember it. And AI can't replicate that. And that's what really kind of moves people. Yes, you've got to have the data and the information, the statistics. Of course, that's all important. But I think wrapping that around story, either a broader narrative or individual stories, is really important. And so I'm very excited about it. So I've sort of, as I went through my career, I went into PR, and because I thought that's the thing that journalists do. It's an obvious kind of segue. It's skills that I've got. I know how to pitch to journalists, having been one for a long time. But I didn't love the actual pitching. I don't mind doing the strategy, and I do that now. So, I work with brands, people, leaders, and help them to come up with a strategy, and then their team or they handle their own media outreach. I was kind of like, I don't like it as a job title. And then I thought, personal brand strategist, because I do love working one-on-one with entrepreneurs, particularly vegan and plant-based entrepreneurs. But that title didn't sit right. And I thought, there's something missing. There was a missing piece. And then I discovered it was storytelling. I found somebody on LinkedIn who was doing something called strategic storytelling or storytelling for business. And I thought, is that a thing? And then I, of course, went down that rabbit hole and found out that yes, it is. And that big companies, big corporate brands are like, paying people to come in and do storytelling trainings to teach their people or, elicit their stories. And I thought, that makes sense. I've been a storyteller from a young age, and that's been the thread that I think has gone through my life, both professionally and even just personally, like for personal enjoyment. So I guess now I sort of position myself as a strategic storytelling for business consultant. So it sounds a bit of a mouthful, but basically I love to work with, vegan and plant-based businesses, entrepreneurs, particularly on their founder story or their origin story, or if someone's working for a brand, and they're an employee, that they're a CEO, maybe just helping them with their origin story and building up their story banks so that when they're posting on social or they're trying to build their personal brand, so the personal branding does come into it, and they want to develop their thought leadership and put themselves out there, that they're making sure they're not just regurgitating the same information that other people in the sector are, which I am seeing a lot of in the vegan and plant-based space. There's a lot of people reporting the facts and the stories and the facts and the statistics, but I think we need more stories so that you become more memorable and stand out, because you can use your stories in so many ways for pitch decks, presentation, beginning of a presentation, partway through a presentation, for your media kit, your speaker kit, investor meetings. Like, there's so much that stories can be used for. And I know from talking to a lot of investors, they invest in people, they invest in the founders. I'm just going to pause there because my cat's there and she just made me jump and she's now meowed. Hi, baby. Mummy's doing an interview. I've talked to a lot of investors, and a lot of them say they invest in the people. Yes, you've got to have a decent business idea, or they've got to believe in the business idea, but they are investing in you as the founder or founders to bring that off. And you'll see that on shows like Shark Tank or Dragon's Den in the UK. They all say, I like you, I want to invest in you. And they'll invest in you when they know your story. So stories, I think, are super important in the vegan movement, in the social justice movement, and in making the world a kinder and better place, and for making business, for getting ethical businesses out there more and being successful.
Yeah, for sure. I love that you talk about the origin story. 'Cause that phrase right there, I think we've been so inundated with superhero stuff probably like the last 20 years, right? But despite how many superhero stories there are out there, like, they all have the origin story, and everyone, no matter how many movies come out, if there's a new origin story for a superhero coming out, like, people are interested. And I love it because it also then makes you feel like you're the superhero of your story, of your life. And I think that it inspires people to tell that story even more frequently, or to finally be willing to share that. And I love that so much.
It's great. It is good. I love what you said, that you're right about like films that we do love, that like the Joker just sprang to mind when you said that. And it's like you find out, because when you watch the films, it's like, oh yeah, he's the baddie, whatever. And then you learn the origin story and you're like, oh, and even though he is a baddie, like you get that empathy,
Mhm.
because, and it's that connect. And that's the thing about stories. And it's like you just kind of, it touches something within us. We're humans and we're wired for storytelling. And apparently there's actually been some research done that when someone is telling a story, like say if I'm standing on a stage, whatever, I'm telling a story, the audience will actually, and especially if you're telling the story in the right way and you are actually telling a story, and a lot of people tell us what they think are stories, but they're actually just giving rhetoric or opinions, which is
Mm.
different, and we can maybe talk about that if you want. But
Yeah.
if you're telling an actual story, using a known like storytelling structure that we're all used to, apparently the audience's minds or their brain waves get synced into the storytellers mind. So it becomes this, that's where that connection comes, because we're kind of synergizing, I don't know if that's a word, if not I've just made it up, between the storyteller and the audience, which I think is what's the one of the key things about stories, is it enables that connection. It can break down things from people from all walks of life. And I'm interested to see how this can play out in the vegan and the plant-based space, because what we often see, particularly in social justice movements, or in things where we're trying to change society through innovation, there can be people that think, no, we're on one side, we're on the other side, you're the enemy, it's us versus them. And you can throw facts at one another. You can say, this is true, no it's not, this is true, no it isn't, and you get nowhere. But often you can break down those barriers when one side tells a story. So it could be an animal farmer saying, look, things are not going great, but this is what I've done for generations. I just need to keep my family fed. Then you can kind of go, oh, okay, I get that story. And now perhaps we can work together on ways to help you transition out of that. So we're not just saying you're bad, you need to be ended, but let's look at ways we could, work together or come up with solutions to help transition you out of that. And then you can kind of come together. And, I know that that can sometimes sound a bit idealistic, but I see that the art of nuance has been so lost,
Oh, yeah.
particularly on social media. It's kind of like, and I know it's obviously happening big time in America, and I know this year is going to be bonkers in the US, what with AI as well and all the rest of it. But I think when we can stop that reactionary binary yes no, so say to some, because often and look, I've done it in the past, I probably still do it to some extent, but I try and catch myself more. It's kind of like, oh, you believe that, or you support that person, therefore you're bad, I don't want you in my life. And I'm kind of like, I don't know, it's not as straightforward as that. I think, yes, someone can believe something, they could support someone, and that might, it might really frustrate me. But if there is some other good in the person, then I will keep them. I'm not necessarily going to chuck them out of my life. It depends. And I'm not saying, obviously, I preface that proviso by saying, obviously, don't keep abusive people in your life, or they're going to, I don't mean that, but I just mean that, I've certainly learned to be, as I, maybe as I've gotten older, I've just grown as a person. That's probably a better way to say it. Probably doesn't have necessarily to do with chronological age. I think we can grow as people at different ages, but just being willing to hear other people's stories and see if there's some way we can connect, even if it's only on one issue. And you might abhor everything else that that person stands for, but there might be something that you think, yeah, you know what, I agree with you on that. Maybe we can work together on that. And for some people, that's a no-no. But I just feel like when we share our stories, it can help to break down those barriers so that we start to understand one another a bit better. And then that can move us to more of a meeting of minds. I think we have that power of story. I think story has that power, I should say. But we've got a kind of a bit of a struggle on our hands with so much of the disinformation and the misinformation that's out there, but we have the power of story. And so, that's why I'm very passionate about it, and, bringing it more into the vegan and the plant-based space.
Yeah. I feel like, when we feel as if someone has information that's incorrect, whether it's kind of things that, when we think about what's going on in the US, it has been for a while, there are very much two sides of things, and it's like, I'm right, and everybody just, like you said, they're throwing facts at each other because you're so focused on, but they're wrong about this, and I've got to show them the numbers, I've got to prove why they're wrong. But yeah, if you can tap into that emotional piece, that connection, and really get them to see it, like you were saying, the difference between when we hear about, billions of animals are killed, to feed people, that, like you said, oh, that doesn't really feel that great, maybe we shouldn't be doing that, but it doesn't really go anywhere. But when you hone in on that one story, the agony of the mother cow losing, watching her baby be pulled away, that has a very different feeling than this many, boy calves are sent off to be made veal. And
And you
yeah,
remember them more. You remember the stuff because it's
yes.
had that emotional connection. You remember that. I can't now. I've now got in my head a pink pigeon because you've told me like his story, and I can feel it. It's an emotional
Yeah.
thing. Whereas with facts and data, they change all the time, and you can't. The human brain can only remember a certain amount of information at any one time, so it kind of goes in and then kind of goes out, and you've got to keep looking it up. Whereas the feeling and a story, you're much more likely to remember that. So it makes you more memorable when you're telling stories. So I think that's a really important one, because I think as well, particularly in the business space, I think people sometimes think, oh, even though the big corporates are doing it, I shouldn't really say it, but I think somehow it's in the sort of the smaller to medium-sized businesses, and maybe in the, the mission-driven businesses, storytelling is seen as a sort of a nice to have. It's a little bit fluffy, and when we must focus on sales and marketing and PR, all of which are important, of course they are, but story goes through all of that. So I think that's why I'm really passionate about it, because I just see the potential and what it can actually do to really help us in this time where veganism is being bashed at the moment. I mean, I remember when we had peak vegan, started around 2014, 2015. And now, we're getting all this, and again, it's information. We're getting misinformation, we're getting disinformation. And yes, of course, we need to counter that with facts to a certain degree, of course. But I think the way to deliver a lot of that is to wrap it around a story to get people on that emotional level.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned before about the difference between storytelling and really just what I can't remember the
Rhetoric or
yes.
opinion or
Yes.
facts. Yeah. So, for
Yeah.
example, companies will often do that on their about page, for example. So you go about us, or often they'll have, here's our story. And then what they go is, oh, well, we started this, and then we did this, and then we did that, and then we did this. And it's like a resume, like a CV, a resume.
Mhm.
And it's not really a story. So what I mean by that is I mean, a story, there are different storytelling structures, and we all know a lot of these. The hero's journey, for example. Now, the hero's journey, which is used in Hollywood films, it's one of
Mhm.
the main storytelling structures. It's quite complicated. There's about 16, 17 steps, and that's too complicated for business. But one of the main things, and sometimes it's called a 3-act structure, and sometimes it's also called the and, but, therefore framework. And I
Mm.
really like that because it really simplifies it. So the and is you're setting the scene, what's happening now. Then you've got the contrast, act 2, but something happens, blah blah blah. And then act 3 is the resolution, therefore, and this happens. And you'll see it used in Pixar as well. I think it's called the story spine. So it's one day such and such happened, then one day, contrast, and
Mm.
because of that something happened, because of that something happened. And you can have as many becauses if you like,
Yeah.
um, until something happens. And from that day on, the transformation. So there's these basically story structures that we are so used to, and it's why we react to TV shows and TV dramas and films, that because of those structures. But the simplified one, and I think which is really helpful, particularly for the business sector, is the and, but, therefore. So it's like something happened, but something then happened to some kind of conflict or contrast, and therefore this is what happens. So yeah, I think it's about sort of being able to learn or become conscious and learn those story structures, and then to find your own stories. Find the stories in yourself as a founder, or as an employee, your origin, or what I call your journey story, which is what I work with people in with. I call it your journey story. It's basically an origin story, but I call it your journey story. And also finding out your customer's story. So it's not just a testimonial, it's an actual customer story, and your staff, if you've got employees, your staff stories, and really eliciting those. And I find it's quite hard to do yourself because it's a bit like you can't see the label when you're inside the tin, and I find that even hard for me. So I will work with other people to help me elicit my stories. I've been doing some various exercises, like some stream of consciousness writing. I've been messaging with one of my oldest friends in the UK, and she's like bringing up memories. I was like, oh, I'd forgotten all about that. And I'm like, oh, that can be a story, and I can share that. Now, the thing about, I did want to say though, Kimberly, it's about stories. I know a lot of people, particularly if they're sharing personal stories or their founder stories, they feel like, oh, it's all about me, it's all a bit self-promoting. But there's a way of doing that where you're telling a story, perhaps something, a story from your past, but then you weave some kind of lesson into it, so there's value for people. Like, just a quick example, I posted something the other day on LinkedIn and a couple other channels where it was a photo of me when I was 21, and I was in a dance class in the UK, in London School of Contemporary Dance. It was a black and white photo. And I said, at the time, I wanted to be a professional dancer, but, life took a different journey. I said, but then my love of dance has been reinvigorated. Like, I go to the gym and I'm doing improv and I'm tapping into my creativity. And the point was, look, sometimes when we think we want to go down one path, but it takes us somewhere else. And then I ask people, what path did you go down, kind of thing. So it's not just, yes, it was my story and I shared it and people loved it. It got a lot of engagement, but there was something in it for them. Because when we're listening to stories, it's like if I'm an audience member and I'm listening to your story, Kimberly, yeah, I'm listening to your story, but I want to know what's in it for me. And we're all like that. And even the most altruistic person, I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of humans can kind of go, oh no, you know, I'm all about serving others, I'm just and that's great, and I think some people are, you know, what have you, but we still want some kind of payoff for ourselves. And so I think when we tell our stories, it's important to consider the audience we're speaking to, because we are going to tell different stories for different audiences. So we might tell a different story to our customers and a different story to our investors. We don't mean we're lying. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about we've got all these stories in our lives, and you know, that we've gathered, and you can pick out one strategic. That's where the strategic comes in. You pick out the one strategically that will be a good story to tell at the beginning of an investor meeting before I then open and talk to, or oh, this could be good for our about page that's going directly to our customers. So it's about finding those stories that are relevant, so that the audience, when they are listening, are getting something from it, even if it's to be moved. It could simply to be moved, to be entertained, to be inspired, to connect. So yeah, it's very exciting. I feel very passionate about storytelling.
Yeah, I love it. I was thinking about so I am a member of Toastmasters. I'm actually currently the president of my club, and it's my favorite thing about giving speeches at the club, but also listening to them. And there's so many times where we do, evaluations after the speeches, and we have, like, you have an official evaluator who fills out an evaluation sheet to give you feedback. They come up and present it, but then we also do a group evaluation, and we allow the audience to share their thoughts on each other's speeches. And so many times, not just to me, but to everyone in the club, someone will say, "You had me from the beginning. I was there with you. I was in that building. I could smell the ocean," or, like, whatever it is, the story that you're creating, you really have the power to put your audience in it with you. And so if you're sharing this kind of hero's journey, if you will, they kind of step into that, and it becomes their journey, and they can see parts of their life, and it all starts to come together. And you're right, they do walk away from it going, "Oh, that was great to hear Katrina's story, Kimberly's story, but now I know my story better." And what a powerful
Exactly.
thing.
Exactly. You've absolutely nailed it. That is so true. We're looking to see ourselves in others, and to
Yeah.
recognize our own stories. And I think as well, like a definition, like a really simple definition, because I know we've talked about a little bit about story structures, and people might think, oh, that's a bit complicated. But I think if you think to yourself, right, is what I'm about to tell a story? A story is about something that happened at a particular time. It's a
Mhm.
moment in time. So that, I think, is a good way of
Yeah.
identifying whether you're about to tell a story, or are you about to go on a rant about animal agriculture, or all the rest of it. It's like, okay, on a Tuesday after, and telling it in the present. I think if you're orally, there's a difference between written stories and oral stories. I think if you're standing on a stage, if you're giving a talk, I think it's good when you're telling a story is to tell it in, like, use the present tense, even though it was in the past. So it could be, it was a Tuesday morning in 1999. I'm sitting on the sofa.
Mhm.
I'm about to, like, do you see what I mean? And because
Yeah.
that's what you just said then, it's about bringing people into the moment. Whereas if you say it in the past, well, I was doing this and I was doing that, it's still fine, whatever. But when you're saying I'm doing this, I'm there, you're right, you're bringing people into that moment, and you're hooking them in. We are literally, as I said, we are wired for story. So when we hear what we understand to be the start of a story, and you don't necessarily, and I don't even recommend this, like going on stage or wherever it is and saying, let me tell you a story. Now, look, you can, it's not the worst thing to do. But it's like, for example, if you go and say, right, I'm now going to share, let's look at the numbers. Like, people will kind of, you know what I mean? They'll switch
Yeah.
off. Whereas if you went on and say, right, I'm going to tell you a story, it's not the worst thing. But the better thing to do is to actually go there and go straight into the story and say something like, so last Wednesday, or 25 years ago, blah, blah. As soon as we hear just that, our
Mhm.
minds know a story's coming, and we pay attention. And that's another tip for particularly if people are doing trainings, or they're giving a talk. Apparently, and I was reading, I think it was something I read recently, apparently our minds start to switch off about 10 minutes into presentation. So you need to do something to bring audiences back. So if you've done, like, 10 minutes or so, and you've shared your presentation, and then you do something like, maybe you ask the audience a question, or you tell tell a story to bring them back. Because if you just sit and present to someone, wrap it on with facts and information, then they're going to zone out. Whereas if you tell a story, and it's that once upon a time, that's the classic one. It's
Yeah.
once upon a time. Ooh, what we want to know, what happens? How is
Mhm.
it relevant to me? Kind of thing. So I hope that's kind of simplified storytelling and stories for people.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. So thank you for that. And I think sometimes when we're kind of in more of a business environment, some people will feel like I don't even know how to get a story into this. And I've seen it in my own life working in a corporate environment, being able to be part of a presentation where we're, let's say, handling some HR things, talking through very, kind of boring but important things, benefits, when your paycheck is coming, that kind of stuff. But then when you start to talk about kind of some of the other things that maybe the company does, so in particular, I was able to share a bit about the volunteer aspect that this one company engages in quite a bit. And so the whole presentation has been very dry and kind of blah, blah, blah. Here it all is. And then I come in the middle of it, not to toot my own horn, but I come in the
No, do
middle of
it.
it.
Toot your own
Yeah.
horn. I give you permission to toot your own
Thank
horn.
you.
Beep, beep.
I come in the middle of it, and I'm like, here's my experience with this volunteer thing. Here's how much money I was able to raise. Here how engaged people are. Here's why the thing in my life that made me even want to do this. I tell a story about my mom and kind of a health issue that she had, and how much it meant that these people who we just work for the same company. I didn't know them, they didn't know me. I shared my mom's story and they said, "We work together. I want to help you." And so they did, and they helped raise more money than we'd ever raised. And it's a feel-good story. It shows them that this company they're a part of, cares about something outside of the numbers. But also, it's the thing that they remember most, even though it's not the most
Yes,
important thing. Their benefits, when they're getting paid, how much their paycheck will be. Those are the important things. But what they remembered was this volunteer aspect. And
exactly.
so we can weave those stories in even when it feels like, ah, it's business, it's stuffy, or, like,
And with that, can be like, you could even have done that. It's great that you did that part way through, but you could even open with that, like to hook people
mhm,
from the beginning. You could say, look, I don't know, whenever it was last year, my mum, blah, blah, whatever your mum's story is, and actually open with that story. And people might be thinking, oh, okay, what's this about? And then you could kind of lead in by saying, and this is what happened with my co-workers. And that's why I absolutely love this company,
mhm,
because it does this kind of thing. It has this kind of ethos, as well, of course, as all the great benefits that we get, which are boom, boom, boom. So you've hooked them in even from the
right.
beginning. So you can
Yep.
you can bring a story in at the beginning, you can bring one in at the middle, you can bring one in at the end. And look, because some people might be listening to it thinking, oh my God, how many stories do I need if I'm going to give a talk? And it varies. And look, stories don't have to be epically long. They can
Mhm.
literally be a 10-second story.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It could be that simple. It could be just one really short sentence that could tell a story. You're not telling necessarily majorly long things. So it does kind of depend, but you're not necessarily going to have, pepper it all the way through. And there are times, it's interesting, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and I can't remember which one it was now, but it was, the person was asked, are there times when you shouldn't tell a story? And it was interesting. And they said, particularly in the workplace, if you're going to fire somebody,
Mm,
you've got to let people go, you've got to let staff go. You don't put it round a story.
right.
You just have to be kind and empathetic and tell them the facts. So it's not about necessarily using story absolutely everywhere and going completely bonkers with it, but it's just recognizing the right, bringing out, as I say, strategic storytelling. It's telling the right stories at the right time to the right audience to get the outcome that you want, that's going to be of value to the audience as well. So it's a win for everybody.
For someone who is maybe new in their vegan business or as a vegan entrepreneur, what are maybe like three things that you would say that they should focus on as they look at what stories to bring in, or how to build stories, whatever you think might be more meaningful. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the first one is, if you're either about to start a business or you've started one, you're quite new to it. I think the first one is your founder story. So your origin story. I think that that is an important one for you yourself, as well as other potential stakeholders. So if you know you're going to be looking for funding, it's going to be important to investors. I think customers, clients now, they want to know about people. You can no longer hide behind a brand. And, you know, a lot of corporates used to do that, but even now, you know, CEOs and directors are having to kind of come out of their cupboards and, you know, onto LinkedIn or start a CEO newsletter, blog, etc. So I think your founder story, and sometimes people might dismiss that. They think, well, I'm starting this vegan business and it's in an area that I haven't worked in before, so I don't have an origin story. Well, you do, because what have you done up until then? Why are you wanting to start this vegan business, or why have you started this vegan business? What are things, what are times, occasions that have happened in your life, particular stories that have led, that now that you look at that, you look back, and obviously it depends how old you are. If you're only a young person, you don't have to look back that far. But you know, you can look back and you might think, oh, you know, and you can trigger a story that you might think, oh yeah, I can see now how that has led to this, or how that has been useful in, and you know, helping to explain why I'm doing this. So I would say definitely really kind of nail your founder story down, which includes your why, and create your story bank that you can use for various things, because obviously you know, you're going to need to do marketing, and those stories can be useful in your marketing. They could be repurposed in many different ways, you know, on social media, in PR, for your media kit. So I think those are really important. Depending on where you're at with your business, you know, if you're a little bit more into it, collect your customers' stories. And I don't just mean testimonials. Yes, it's great. Get those reviews, get those Google reviews, Facebook reviews, of course. Get a nice little testimonial that you can use. But if you, particularly when you've got clients who are literally like, they're super fans, where, you know, whether you're a service-based business and you've created an, you know, incredible transformation for them, or, you know, you sell chocolate and, you know, people can't wait for your next, you know, they're just super fans. You know, you can actually find out a bit of a story about them. So you might think, oh, well, a chocolate, you know, that what, you know, interesting story could come out of that. But maybe someone, you know, bought your vegan chocolates and took them to their, I don't know, dying friend or colleague or hospital, you know what I mean? Something like that. It's like the stories, that's, you know, a story. It's much more of a story. Or if, you know, and that's obviously easier somewhat perhaps with service-based businesses, where, you know, you're getting your customer's story of transformation. But it's not just, oh, I was in this place, then I worked with Kimberly, then I now everything's great in the world. It's like, it's fleshing that out. It's like, right, you know, it's taking people back to that moment, and then things, but then something happened, the conflict, and then this. So you're actually teasing out their stories. And then I think you've got your brand story, and that can depend. Like if you're just a solo, I shouldn't say just, if you're a solopreneur and you don't have employees and your brand is your brand, your name, then maybe that's not necessarily quite as relevant, because you are your brand. But if you're a vegan business, say you're, I guess I'm going with chocolate again, you know, and you're the founder, but you know, you've got other people involved, and the brand might be a completely different name. So then you've got kind of like your brand story, and obviously that's going to often is influenced by the founder story, but it's just kind of finding that brand story, the brand's voice, because the brand's voice could be quite different to yours. You could be quite shy and conservative and start a vegan business where the brand voice is quite cheeky and you know, outspoken and all that kind of thing. So that, in terms of, because you asked me very specifically about the stories for new or vegan businesses, I think it will be founder origin story, customer story, and brand story. And I'll add a bonus one, which would be staff story. So that's just if you're already, you know, that's probably for more experienced people. If people have had, particularly if you had staff members there that have been there a long time, they're going to have stories to tell,
Mhm.
their own stories to tell, and their own stories about your business and who they are as people. And people just, they really love that. Like you described to your colleagues when you talked about the volunteer thing,
Mhm.
people like to know, we're curious creatures. We want to know about each other's lives.
Yeah.
And this is done in a wholesome way. We see it done on reality TV,
Mhm.
often in quite a cruel way,
Mhm.
for drama. But I think this is a way to use story and, tell your people's stories, your customer stories, your brand stories in a good way that's, good for you, good for your business,
Mhm.
and good for the world.
Yeah. Katrina, I could spend hours talking to you about
It's a
this.
great topic, isn't it? I'm
It's
really
so
loving this. I
wonderful.
know it's
Me too. But I'll be conscious of time, even though I don't want to. And and I have one more question for you. Tell me about your favorite hummus or favorite way to eat hummus.
Okay, I'm gonna tell little Hummer's story since you've been on stories, and I told my wife Tracy I was going to tell this. She went, "That's not very nice," but I said I'm doing it anyway because it's entertaining. Well, first of all, I'll start with my favourite hummus. So I'm in Sydney, Australia. I'm from the UK originally, but I live in Sydney, Australia. So it's just a branded podcast. It's a hummus. Pilel, I think, is the brand, and it's just a nice hummus.
Mm,
It's quite creamy. I like my hummus. It hasn't got any fancy flavor to it, which I quite like. It's just kind of got this, I don't know, it's just nice. That's not a very good description, but anyway, that's my go-to hummus. Now, my hummus story. So back when we went vegan, so my partner Tracy is a clinical hypnotherapist, psychotherapist, and she also she trained as a naturopath in 2009, but before that she was still interested in nutrition. So when I said, oh, we're now vegan, or if you want to buy cheese you'll have to get your own, she pretty much joined me. I was very lucky and happy that
yeah.
she joined me pretty much straight away, but she was a bit concerned nutrition wise, so she started looking into veganism and started getting all these books, and then she discovered raw veganism, and so she thought she would experiment and make some raw hummus. Now that all sounds fine, but what, instead of just like making a batch and then testing it and trying it and seeing if it were all right, she decided to make it the day that we'd invited some friends round for dinner. So it was like a nice dinner party at our place in London. So I hadn't even tasted it. So we're all sitting there, and she dishes out the raw hummus, and we taste it, and oh my God, it was awful. It
Oh.
was so bland. I don't know what she'd put in it or not put in it. And you could see the looks on the guests' faces. We were all like, people were politely tasting it and chewing it, and you could tell. And we were trying to, I was trying to be the light of the party, keep the conversation going and what have you. And at the end of it I said, well, and even she knew, this is the funny thing, at the end of it she said, oh, the hummus was awful, wasn't it? I said, duh, yeah. But anyway, she hasn't made hummus since. She's mostly raw, very high raw anyway, so she just
Okay.
doesn't really eat hummus at the moment. But I love hummus, so don't let that put you off hummus. But my tip there will be, if you are going to make your own hummus, do test it beforehand
Yes.
with people, rather than wait till a nice dinner party. And in fact, I had a couple of editors there who I'd worked with, so it was like a partly friend / professional dinner party. Don't ruin it by making bland raw hummus. There's my hummus story. So did you bring the hummus? She did bring the hummus, but it wasn't good hummus.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you, Tracy, for allowing that story to be shared. Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, hummus, it seems so simple, but it can be tricky. And for me, it doesn't always come out the same every single time I make it. So it's always a gamble, and I'm getting
Yeah.
better, but I still haven't perfected it.
Well, it's nice that there's such a variety. Like I say, look, I tend to be someone, if I like something, I'll tend to buy it over and over again. But occasionally, like if my regular one's out of stock, I have tried others. And occasionally it is nice to have something a little
Mhm.
bit different. So that's what I
Yeah.
love about hummus. You call it hummus, don't you? We call it hummus. And I love that it does have that variety. And it's a basic in any vegan diet. It's good for you. It's healthy. It's tasty. It's very versatile.
Yes.
Um, a dish, if you can call it a dish or whatever you
Mhm.
call it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm very American, so yeah, it always comes out as hummus, because yeah, because, but yeah, hummus does sound better for sure.
I'm not sure. I think it's all fine, however we pronounce it. It's delicious anyway.
Katrina, thank you so, so much for joining me. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I know the listeners are going to get so much out of it and hopefully start telling their stories too.
I hope so too. I've had such good fun. I've really enjoyed our chat, Kimberly. It's absolutely lovely. I love what you're doing with your show and, getting the message out there. And yes, to everybody, share your stories.
Welcome back. Are you inspired to write a story after listening to this chat with Katrina? I for sure am. Also, how good was that hummus story? As a reminder, start here. Uncover your origin or founder story. Create a story bank. You'll use different stories in different scenarios. Collect your customer stories. And write your brand story. To connect with Katrina, visit her websites, katrinafox.com and veganbusinessmedia.com. You can find her on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube. All of those links can be found in the show notes. I hope you found this episode helpful and inspiring. Please subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you're loving it, please give Did You Bring the Hummus a 5-star rating and leave a review. It's an easy way to keep supporting the show. Be sure to share these episodes with your friends. If you're finding something good here, they will too. If you're a vegan or you know a vegan who would be a great fit for the podcast, follow the Be a Guest link in the show notes. Fill out the quiz and I'll be in touch. Get on my mailing list and grab 3 super fun and easy recipes as a thank you. And don't forget, if you love the podcast and you would enjoy a shout out from me on a future episode, check out the show notes for the link for more information. If you're a vegan business who would like to sponsor episodes of Did You Bring the Hummus, again, I'd love to chat. Find my contact details in the show notes. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Did You Bring the Hummus, and visit my website, didyouBringTheHummus.com, for more information about me, updates on what I'm working on, new podcast episodes, and all things vegan. Finally, I would love to hear from you. What do you need help with? Is there a topic you want to hear covered on a future episode? DM me on Instagram or send me an email, didyouBringTheHummus@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.